Hello friends, I'm back for another year in the Bible update video. This time we're going to be in Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. For those of you who are wondering, did it really take him that long to read those three small books of the Bible? No, it did not. It's been a couple weeks since my last video. I actually am still on pace, on track. I've been reading every day and almost every day, and I'm ahead of schedule. You know, my plan was 3 pages a day to finish the Bible in a year, and I'm at least 3-4 weeks ahead now at this point on my pace right now. I just haven't had time to record videos. We had a death in the family, so we had one day that I could have been recording. We went down and did a funeral, and we've had a lot of stuff going on at work and in our personal lives where we just had busyness, and I haven't had enough time to record videos lately. So you might have also noticed that I have a new bookshelf in here. I did a little studio update, so I haven't had as much time to record, but I have been reading, and so catching up now with this series. Thanks again to all of you who watch these videos and have been encouraging and supportive of it. I really appreciate it. So Ezra-Nehemiah, one scroll originally, split into 2 books. What I was thinking as I read this was there's things I like about it and things I don't like about it in the terms of where it comes in the Bible. So I shared in the last video, 1st and 2nd Chronicles was probably originally towards the end of the Old Testament books. It was written after the Israelites returned from exile, so it kind of has a rosier outlook on all of these stories of the kings and everything. But it ends with just this little note about Cyrus allowing the people to return from exile and go back to Jerusalem. And so I like that Ezra-Nehemiah follows right on that heels because it tells us kind of the 3-stage story of how that happened and how they went back and how they reset things back up in Jerusalem. What I don't like about it is that we kind of just skip over the exile. And it even mentions in here Jeremiah, Haggai, Zechariah, some of these prophets, and so we get mention of that, but we don't get to live in that tension. And from having done some studying of the Old Testament, I know that the exile is a huge part, right? And we're going to get there when we get into the prophetic literature. So it's kind of in a weird place. I guess if we read this chronologically, it would come later. But it was fun to read, to go from Chronicles straight into this and kind of see, them talking about going back, and Cyrus initially sending in Zerubbabel is kind of the first person that goes back, and we're focusing on the temple, getting the temple rebuilt. Great place to start. I like that's the first thing. And then Ezra goes in, he's focusing on the Torah and the law and getting everybody back into practice, right? And then Nehemiah goes in and he's getting the walls rebuilt, getting safety and security. There was some, historically I read about in the study Bible, the ESV Concise Study Bible, talking about some of the wars that were going on between the Persian Empire, I think it was Persia and Egypt and stuff like that. And it was probably Jerusalem got destroyed in some of those wars between other countries while the Israelites, for the most part, were in exile. So now they're going back and they're just kind of putting things back together. And it's a really interesting story. I noted here in chapter 2 of Ezra that the numbers, they're kind of giving you the numbers of all the people who went back, and they're tiny numbers compared to the numbers of the tribes of Israel back in the Pentateuch. And they were marking everything in the book of Numbers, right? And these massive tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And now it's like literally 123 people from Bethlehem. It's like, whoa, I mean, like, the devastation of the exile and that part of their history and what it did to them. And so they go back and they set up the temple, and worship is restored. Ezra comes in, and there's a pretty good summary here in chapter 5. I just wrote good summary of what happened when they were leaving exile and coming back and taking over Jerusalem. And so they get things in order: temple, worship, Torah. And then Nehemiah shows up. There's that weird story at the end of Ezra where, the foreign wives and the children, it's like, what? I think one of the things that's a big takeaway for these 3 books is, despite the fact that they're returning from exile, which is this huge moment in the people of Israel, it wasn't easy. There's a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of infighting. It wasn't like this perfect end to the story. Again, as I've said a lot in this series, they need something else, and that something else is going to be a savior. They're pointing towards the need for something deeper and a more holistic restoration of themselves as a people. But it's interesting to see it go through. I didn't take as many notes on the page in Nehemiah as I did with Ezra. That might be because I'm a little bit more familiar with the Nehemiah story and the rebuilding of the walls and all the fighting and the things of that go on. But I liked these as like a good history lesson from the people coming back and kind of getting to live in that tension of it's time to come back from exile, but it's going to be a complex process. It's going to be complicated. There's all these different relationships, and as much as it's like this huge moment, it's also pretty tough. And it kind of goes back to some of that back and forth between God and God's people earlier in the Old Testament in the history of Israel. So it really feels like it fits in there. It kind of ends with this new covenant. It was a good read. And then I love that it just says at the very, very end, "Remember me, O God, for good." I thought I underlined that phrase and thought, Lord, remember me for good. That's a good prayer for us, right? Esther. So I'm going to also talk about Esther in this video. Esther is such a fascinating story. Again, one that I'm familiar with. I've read all about, Esther and Mordecai and Haman, and this beautiful story. Of note that God is not mentioned in the book of Esther at all, and yet so much of God is in this story and the work of God, and this kind of beauty pageant at the beginning, like the king gets rid of his queen, and then Esther wins. It's like American Idol, or not? I mean, I guess what kingdom are they in here? The citadel of Susa. So it's Susa Idol. They get the new queen, and then Mordecai discovers this plot and gets in the king's good graces by saving him. And then Haman has another plot, and then Esther risks her life and all this back. I mean, it's a wild story. It's a wild story. So it's made for fun read. Again, this one I think I read in my Bible. Esther is only like 8 or 9 pages, and I just sat down and read the whole thing. I was like, this is fun. So I noted, where did I note? There's this beautiful line in here. Okay, chapter 7. Haman's downfall. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman had thrown himself on the couch where Esther was reclining, and the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house?" As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. What a great, that's like so poetic and rich, vivid imagery. And so in this book that doesn't mention God, you see so much of God's work in here. And it's just a beautiful story of redemption. And again, the Jewish people, and God's love for them and his concern for them in the midst of, it's this, great little story that kind of gives you a little snapshot of God's love for God's people, of his desire to protect them in the midst of trouble, but it's a mess. It's a mess. So, and then you get the Feast of Purim. So that kind of it's a good historical marker for that moving forward. So, and then it's going to take a turn into the wisdom literature and get to Job. So I've actually, as I'm recording this, I'm almost done with Job. So I'm going to do another video and get that recorded soon and get it out for you. But Ezra-Nehemiah, the people coming out of exile. Esther, this beautiful story, just kind of right in the middle of the Old Testament, a little bit, not quite, but just a beautiful story of it's fascinating. It's just like this back and forth. I mean, again, I think I've said this a couple times in this series, like you'd think that Esther would be something that HBO would be making a show out of, like a one-season limited series kind of thing that we see on TV. It's like so fascinating. And I really, again, these were easy reads for me. This was like you get out of 1st and 2nd Chronicles, which was kind of a slog, and now you get 3 books. It's like boom, boom, boom. Like, there's some like lists and things in these books, particularly Ezra and Nehemiah, but they're also like weaving a really beautiful story. And as I'm reading this straight through, it's cool to kind of see how it all does this a little bit, which is really fascinating. So I like this a lot. So that's where I'm at. I'm just finishing up Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, now diving into Job. I encourage you, whether you're reading along with me or you slowed down just to dive in. These are good books where you can just give yourself a half hour and read straight through it. Don't worry about your page count or stopping. Just go straight through. It makes for a really, really great experience. If you have any questions about my process or anything I'm going through, leave those in the comments. Definitely, if you want to check out some of the other videos, I've made a lot of fun videos recently here on my channel, so check those out as well. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.